Thank you for joining me, ladies. You guys said you guys have the graveyard shift, but hey, we
They
still
saved the best for last.
Actually, you know what? When you look at it like that. All right, we're just going to get straight into it. And just to remind everyone, we are looking into balancing flexibility, productivity, as well as well-being. And I'll start with you, Bonolo. How can organizations strike that perfect right balance between offering flexibility as well as maintaining high levels of productivity, especially when we're looking into what 2020 was able to bring to us, hybrid work environments?
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think about myself and I think about every single person in this room. And if I asked you to maybe think about the 5 layers or the 5 identities that you sit with as an individual right now, I'll talk about my own. I'm a mom of 2 toddlers. Wow. I'm a daughter, a wife, student, sister, and, avid reader. Let's say 5 things, right, that I do, and 5 identities that I hold. And I actually show up to work with those different identities. I don't stop being a parent the moment I walk into, the work environment. And I don't stop thinking about that particular responsibility just because I'm at work. And I think what the flexibility, to your point, of COVID-19 showed us is that actually we are able to look at that intersection of the professional and the personal. And that's what we're sitting with right now. This is a big conversation for a lot of us who are looking, and taking care of people within our organizations, is to say, how do we start to think about work differently? And Gardner actually talks about this as radical flexibility, right? What does radical flexibility look like in a world where we hold, fulfill multiple identities and multiple responsibilities? So radical flexibility is really about saying, how do we take a human-centric approach to work, to the hours we spend at work, but also to the responsibilities, and finding really, really nuanced ways to think about our contribution.
Yes.
So I want to share a couple of things that we've been able to do at BTS. So for many of you, I don't know if you know BTS, but we are a strategy execution firm, and actually, we spent a lot of time working with leaders during the pandemic to say, what are the mindsets? What are the things that we can do to actually help equip our people to respond to the crisis? And there have been a couple of things that we've been able to do and to help our partners think about in this. And I think one of the things, when we talk about hybrid, or we talk about flexibility, and we're talking about high performance, is that it actually starts with the culture of an organization. And we're finding that where it's difficult to even think about flexibility or implement, hybrid ways of work or any flexible ways of showing up, oftentimes there's a cultural challenge. So where we don't have cultures of ownership, where we don't have cultures of radical accountability, where we don't have cultures of trusting people to do their work, trusting people to deliver, flexibility becomes this challenge, because suddenly it's threatening this control, right? Suddenly it's threatening this way of work that's predictable, where we know who's doing what and when. And for us, it really starts with a culture shift, and we had to experience that as well as an organization. I will say, our organization was probably ready for that kind of thinking because we've got quite a strong and robust culture. But not every organization has that. And I think the shift is not just about new policies. It's not just about how many hours, how long, where, how many days, and so on. But it's to say, what's the culture shift that's required for us to actually be able to move into this new way of working? So that's the one thing, the culture shift. And then I'll touch on 2 other things. And really, it's around setting the guardrails, right? We have new people, new joiners. Earlier on, we spoke about onboarding and so on. And of course, organizations are finding that, being able to replicate almost the culture and the in-between invisible cultural elements that actually help people settle within an organization are becoming quite challenging, right?
Yeah.
With the flexibility. And one of the things that we needed to do as well as a team is to say, what are the key moments where we actually need, to be together?
Yes.
And I think it's important to define. So as opposed to this blanket approach or this blanket policy in terms of flexibility and, existing in this hybrid world, what is the nuance of our context? What are the key moments where we actually need to come together as a team and cultivate our culture? And I think that's a key one, because often when we start to think about, hybrid ways or flexibility, we think we're going to lose a lot. And yes, there are some things that we lose.
Yeah.
But if we actually set guardrails, if we define for ourselves contextually what those moments are, is going to be key. And I just want to share, oftentimes we think there's a decline in productivity or there's a decline in high performance just because people aren't at the office 24/7.
True.
But in the same research that Gartner did, one of the things that they found is that high performance actually increased by 40%.
Wow.
And so there's a direct correlation with flexibility and high performance. And I think what we're now grappling with is how do we find the models that work within our contexts?
Absolutely love that fact that you say that it all starts with the culture of the company. It doesn't just happen, it doesn't just get done, but it all starts with what the culture is and does it fit into what we're trying to do. So I'm going to come to you, Elin, just to get into. We're getting to the end of the year, right? We've got performance expectations, there's deadlines that we have to meet, and we have what we call a digital fatigue. So now how can employees actually utilize strategies that will help them just to get over that digital fatigue while still performing at a very high level?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's something that I focus on a lot in the coaching work that I do. I think we have to be realistic.
Yeah.
And remember that the digital fatigue is not just about being online all the time and participating in Zoom meetings or Teams calls, but it's also realizing that the same device that we are using for our work is connecting us to WhatsApp, it's connecting us to social media, it's connecting us to this environment that is not just focused on work.
Yes.
And I think when we have that realization, we get to understand that we need to understand what are our boundaries as employees, what are the parameters within which we can work that enables us to then be productive within the requirements of either the work hours or within the project that you have, and also putting in strategies that enables you to have micro breaks, right? Because if we're working remotely, we're on our WhatsApp all the time, answering, in questions about crises or urgent things that are coming up. We're on Teams chats. We're probably attending some sort of webinar where we've got the webinar on our one device and we're participating in another thing. And I think the important factor is we need to ensure that people, first of all, are given the safety to be able to take those breaks, but also have some sort of guidance from leadership. Because often we see our leaders, I think in a session earlier, we were talking about how important, or the panel was talking about how important it is for leaders to model the behavior that they want their employees to have. And that goes for digital fatigue as well. So the other thing I want to talk about is how I often in coaching conversations have leaders and employees coming to me and saying, I don't feel like I can switch off. I feel like I have to be online all the time. Not just for myself, but for my family, for my work, and all of that. And so what I teach people to do is understand, what does productivity look like for you? What does productivity look like for your organizational culture? And then creating boundaries within that so that when you're showing up, You're showing up from a space of being rested,
Yes.
but also that understanding while I am online and always on in these specific hours, what does that look like for me, and how am I able to then switch off when I need to, so that I am no longer having some sort of fatigue. I also want to just end off to say that we have to remember also we enjoy the dopamine fix, right? The notification that comes up on our email, on Teams, on WhatsApp. And so it's important to recognize that we need to retrain ourselves to understand that that kind of dopamine fix is actually not conducive to our well-being.
That's true.
And so when we consciously are able to unplug, we then create an environment within which we can thrive.
Yeah.
And when we're also setting boundaries with our leaders to say, I am taking this time off, I will be offline. And it doesn't become a matter of feeling like I have to feel a little bit guilty just because I'm no longer online. And also employees need to also feel safe to be able to do that.
Just a quick one, back on the digital fatigue, I just want to find out, maybe there's someone here experiencing it, but they're not sure if they are really experiencing digital fatigue. How can one identify that I'm actually experiencing digital fatigue?
Yeah, it comes up in so many shapes and forms, and Bonolo, I'll ask you to add on. I think the problem is what I find from my coaching clients and for myself personally, I find that you often have digital fatigue when the telltale signs is you can't get off your device, right? That's the one thing. You're constantly on your device. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing you're taking is your cell phone to check your notifications. When you are going and having a tea break, you are sitting on your phone. When you are having supper, for instance, you're sitting on your phone right before you're going to bed. You end up having digital fatigue because what's happening is that you are always online and you are actually feeling tired. But you also have a little bit of an addiction.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of overstimulation, right? Our nervous system is overstimulated because of all those informations, pings, the stuff, the highlight reels, the TikToks that we're sitting on.
Yes.
And so you identify, the ways that you can identify that you have digital fatigue is that you are actually just feeling mentally tired. It's the big sign. You also are not sleeping well, right? A big sign of that is because of the screen, right? So your mind is always running away with you with different thoughts that you're thinking based on what you've looked at. And then lastly, there's a lot of other ways that you can look at it, but you're also finding that you are at some point not wanting to engage in personal conversation as a result of the overstimulation that you've had throughout the day.
Okay, there's a great way of just trying to identify that. I just wanted to help people so that they can actually know that I'm actually digitally fatigued and not just fatigued, right? So I want to get back into the flexibility conversation. How can leaders, especially now, I believe that a lot of Gen Zs coming into interviews are now asking, is the job hybrid? Can I work from home? And maybe then the question for a traditional organization is, okay, we might want to be hybrid, but how do we even do that? So my question really is, how can leaders then foster accountability and collaboration with teams that are working across different locations as well as schedules?
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing, and I think it's one of the fears or the areas that leaders grapple with. How do I stay on top? How do I know that my team member is still productive, they're producing outputs and so on? And I think that's fair. And one of the things that I like to talk about is that radical accountability, right? That I also touched on earlier on. And we are shifting. Earlier on, we were talking about shifting into a skills-based economy. The other one is around outputs, right? Is there clarity around what people need to produce, by when they need to produce it, and understanding what support then do they need to be able to do that, right? And so when we're working remotely or work in a hybrid environment, it's not always the case that we'll check in 5 times, 10 times a day to know, right, what the status is. And I think, again, going back to that trust, so having the trust, having established, right, what the outcomes that we're working towards are. But also, I think we often take for granted, and someone mentioned to this earlier on, that people who are newer within the work environment, right, there are a number of rituals or disciplines that they're still learning.
Yes.
And I think it's quite critical, and we were talking about this earlier on, is to identify, based on the level, based on where people are at, what is the additional support that they actually need to be able to be productive. And so it's not just a blanket approach as a manager to say, well, here's a policy, here's how we're going to work, but knowing and understanding that each employee is nuanced, they are at very different stages of their professional life, and then having a fit-for-purpose approach to how we support people in those roles. So I think it's a challenge that a lot of leaders grapple with, but I think with being clear in terms of delivery outputs, putting together, number 2, the right support structures that, you know, are connected to the level and where the person is, and understanding even, I think thirdly, their working styles, right?
Yes.
We learned yesterday that we all have learning styles, we also have working styles, and what does that look like for each individual? And then having that conversation, I think, is quite key.
Amazing. Elin, I just want to get back to you, especially when it comes to mental and emotional support, especially when it comes to like well-being. One of the practical interventions that HR can implement to prevent burnout, or maybe rather support them through this time, especially, look, we're at the end of the year, we have that burnout, but how can we now start to support, especially for mental and emotional well-being of our employees?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's at the core of what I do. I like to say that burnout isn't a personal failure, it's a systems failure, right? I think because we find that organizations have a lot of expectations from staff, that employees automatically feel like they have to give so much and, you know, pour in so much. So I think the other thing that HR individuals need to do is to address both capacity and culture.
Yes.
Where capacity is, we need to audit workload. We need to audit output. We need to help managers set realistic expectations of their staff. And we also need to actually implement the right to disconnect.
Yes.
Right? The other thing in terms of culture is to understand what does rest look like. We need to be able to teach our leaders that it's normal for people to rest. Because if you are not resting, then you're actually not being a productive employee and you're not achieving the goals that you need to. So the other aspect of it is in teaching or helping our leaders normalize rest, we must also help our leaders identify signs of fatigue. Right? What does that look like, or what might it look like in an employee? So some research shows that 84% of employees believe that flexibility actually contributes to reducing that burnout.
Wow.
But it must be paired with psychological safety, which I think is some of the themes that have been running.
True.
So that people feel that it's okay for me to unplug. And as HR, we are custodians of those ways of working. Right? We need to be able to guide leaders on what that looks like in their environment, but then also give employees the parameters within which that works. So I often encourage leaders to view burnout as asking the question, what is contributing to the burnout?
Yes.
What in our system, what in our way of working, what in our way of measuring performance is contributing to that? And where do we then find and highlight the gaps or the risks? And that's where we then need to address the issues.
Fantastic.
I want to add to this. I think, you know, as HR leaders, we sometimes don't feel like we have that privilege, right, of resting. You said, we're the custodians of people within our organizations. And often, you know, it's on us to come up with the solutions for people challenges and so on. And maybe a challenge to us all in the room is to also check in. I know we did a poll and everyone said, yay, I'm energized, I'm great, I can go forever. But really checking in with ourselves, because we constantly working with other people and it's highly externalized. Checking in with ourselves, I think, is also quite key, right?
Yeah.
As well.
100%. But just in closing, I know we've spoken about flexibility from a hybrid and remote work point of view, but then just from a holistic point of view, how can we then, especially towards the end of the year, now start to implement or even just take into consideration flexibility of our employees? Like you mentioned, Bonolo, your mom, your reader, your wife, you all of these things, but how can we now just put all of that into the flexibility in the workplace? And you guys, both of you can answer that question, just in closing.
Awesome, thanks for that. I want to take on what Bonolo had mentioned earlier. I think as individuals with the various roles that we play outside of our corporate position, we have to also consider what works for us.
Yes.
And we have to have honest conversations with our leaders, right? Either through an HR mechanism where HR is facilitating or being the voice for us, where we can actually say, for me, based on my role, based on the output, based on the performance that's expected of me, in addition to the other roles that I have in my personal life, this is actually what flexibility would look like.
Yeah.
This is how it would work for me, and this is the contract that I'm willing to agree on in terms of how I can then produce the output that's expected.
Yes.
Because we have to be realistic. I mean, times have changed now. It's no longer about how many hours am I online.
Yeah.
It's about what are the outputs,
Yes.
and within the parameters of my style of working, how does it look like, and what does it look like for me to be able to produce that output so that I can be trusted in being flexible, and also that my managers or leaders then have an understanding of what works for me and how that directly contributes to productivity.
Perfect. Bonolo?
Yeah, there was a little provocation earlier on. I think it was Anya who was talking about Ubuntu and how, we have this idea of Ubuntu and we talk about it and we almost evoke Ubuntu when it's, it suits us.
Yeah.
And, when we talk about this conversation of flexibility and hybrid work and so on, and the multiple identities that we carry, right, and being able to navigate those within this new ways of work, part of Ubuntu is actually to be able to see someone's humanity.
Yeah.
Right? So Ubuntu is not just this thing, this buzzword. It's actually to say, I see you, I see where you're at, I see your challenges,
Yes.
I see the things that you're carrying, right? And I think one of the critical parts of what we've learned, even with the COVID-19 crisis, is just going back to that humanity, to say that actually the fragility of life, but also the nuance of life is quite important, and that actually should inform our mindset in terms of how we approach people. So I think it is the honest conversations about your situation, but it's also the mindset that we're not going to be carrying sticks, right, to say, where are you, when, what are you doing? It's a huge mindset shift. It's to say, I trust you to deliver the value that we've contracted on, particularly from a team perspective.
Yes.
And I see you and I see all the things that you're carrying. How do we navigate? How do we support you? And so I know that can feel like a slippery slope, and often we go into, but if I do this for one, what about the other? It becomes the question of how do we implement this, for all? But it's highly contextual, and I think that's the big work, is understanding the people that we work with, understanding the nuances that they carry, but also understanding that when we're able to actually address those nuances in their lives, we can actually not just get more from a productivity perspective, but even from a well-being and a wellness perspective. You want to do more, you want to show up, and only because you were seen and you were valued and your leader or your organization put that trust in you. And I think that's the work and that's the conversation that a lot of us are having and that a lot of us need to have within our organizations. And it feels like sometimes a battle, but it's at the core of it is that humanity.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Elin and Bonolo. Thank you so much. As we're just closing that off, just please give them a huge round of applause.
Section.